because this is often a common struggle spot for couples, is just when their personality differences clash. And a really common one is when you have an introvert and an extrovert who are partnered together. And so what happens when one of you wants to go out and the other one desperately wants to stay home? One of you might end up thinking, we never do anything fun anymore, or the other one might be thinking, well, I'm exhausted and I just want some peace and quiet. And somehow both of you end up feeling misunderstood. So if you're an introvert married to an extrovert, or if you're an extrovert married to an introvert, this episode really is for you. Hi, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Polinsky, and you're about to start communicating more clearly and feeling more connected in your relationships with this podcast. As a marriage and family therapist, I help people change relationship patterns that feel automatic, those reactions that just kick in before you even realize that they're happening. And for over 10 years, I've worked with people who do hard things for a living, and yet they still feel stuck when it comes to connection in their relationships. This podcast isn't about scripts or formulas or doing relationships the right way. Instead, it's about slowing down reactive moments, understanding what's underneath them, and helping relationships feel more like a team again. So if you want things to feel better, to feel calmer, steadier, and more at ease in your closest relationships, then this podcast is for you. Because here you'll start to learn how to pause conflict, understand what's happening emotionally, and then respond instead of react. And when you do that, connection starts to feel more possible. Quick note though, this podcast is educational only and isn't a substitute for professional therapy or counseling. If you need individualized support, please consider working with a mental health counselor. Okay, let's dive in. I'm really glad you're here. Hi there. Welcome back to the Communicate and Connect podcast. You're listening to episode 81, Introvert Married to an Extrovert. Here's what actually works. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Polinsky, and I'm really excited to talk about this. So let's start first by clearing some things up around needs, because when there is this personality clash, it's really not about who's right. You know, a lot of couples get caught up in like who's right and who's wrong and how things should be for a good marriage. But actually what this is about is how each nervous system gets regulated. So introverts tend to recharge through quiet, having fewer people around when things are more predictable, and having a lot of downtime after socializing. Whereas extroverts, they tend to recharge through a lot of connection, a lot of activity, having shared experiences together, and just being around more people. And so when an extrovert wants to go out, they're often seeking connection with their partner, but also connection with other people. They just want all the connection. And when an introvert wants to stay in, they're often seeking regulation to calm the nervous system down. And neither one is being difficult. They're just both trying to get real emotional needs met. And so let's talk a little bit about why one feels drained and the other feels lonely in these different situations. Because here's really where couples get stuck and where the clash starts, is because the introvert might start feeling overstimulated and they may feel pressured. And if they're not communicating well around this, the introvert could start to feel like their limits don't matter to their partner. Whereas the extrovert, again, if they're not communicating and they're just letting their brains tell them the worst case scenario, the extrovert might start feeling rejected. They might feel unimportant to their partner, or they might feel like they're too much, like their needs for socialization are somehow too much, that they're too much for their partner. And so now the conflict isn't about going out or staying in. The conflict then becomes like, wait, do my limits matter to you? And oh my gosh, do you think I'm too much? That's a very different conflict and has to do with what's below the surface versus what's on top of the surface. The conversation really then switches to being about, you don't see how hard this is for me, or you don't want to be with me. And that is an attachment problem. That has to do with the feeling secure and accepted and loved and cherished in my relationship no matter what. So it's not a personality problem. It's a do we feel secure in the relationship problem. And if you don't name the emotional meaning underneath, then the same cycle and the same argument will just repeat over and over. To start, we'll talk about what doesn't work. So So it doesn't work to just force one partner to get over it, or keeping a score like, well, we did this last time, and so now it's my turn. Kind of like forcing turn taking. It doesn't tend to work. And assuming that compromise equals suffering. That also doesn't work, because there can be compromises where that is like a win-win. A win-win compromise is the type of compromise that we want to go for, not a I win and you lose this time and next time you'll win and I lose. That's not the type of compromise that we want. We want win-win compromises. And so what does work? So trade-offs, not sacrifice. That's point one. Instead of we always do what you want, you can try doing a little bit of a trade-off. I'll talk more about this in just a moment, but one social activity that is, still nourishing for the extrovert and stretches the introvert. But by stretch, I mean is a stretch, but is not a sacrifice or suffering. And that's where we get into what is a win-lose compromise versus a win-win. So that could look like going to dinner with one other couple instead of going to the rave party for New Year's Eve. So it stretches the introvert to be going out, but it's not a huge stretch. Even a small group of close couples is not going to be a huge stretch for the introvert, and is still going to feel nourishing to the extrovert in most cases. And then you can swap and do more quiet activity that feels really nourishing for the introvert and might be a little bit of a stretch for the extrovert. An example of that might be like going on a walk together. It's not overly social, so it's going to be pretty nourishing for the introvert, but there's still some activity involved, and so it will be a little bit more palatable for the extrovert. It's not as social as what they might prefer, but it still is active. And so both types count as relationship time together. Point two in this around what works is having planned time apart. Sometimes it can come up for couples where they feel like if we are apart, that is like a rejection. My partner doesn't want to be with me, but that's not really the case. Time apart is helpful for relationship maintenance and for your own individual mental health maintenance and your own peace as an individual. So oftentimes introverts need more space so that way they can show up fully later on. They recharge, they get all their energy, and then they can show up and be fully engaged later on. And extroverts need connection in order to feel more secure. And so when they're feeling their introvert partner showing up and engaging, then the extrovert feels more secure, like you're spending time with me, we're doing this together, we're connecting. And then when they feel more secure, they can also feel more at ease in allowing their introverted partner to have space to recharge, so that way they can then show up again later and be more social. And when you guys are talking about this pattern, like just even talking about it can go a really long way. But then if you plan times of like, here is alone time and here is social time, and you schedule it out, that can really help a lot. One, it prevents resentment because you both know the plan and are agreeing to the plan and are knowing that if I'm going to get more downtime this day or I'm going to get more social connection this day, and knowing that our needs are going to be met, even if they're not met immediately, like right in the moment, can go a long way to reducing conflict and helping both people feel more at peace in the relationship. The other thing that really works in this scenario is having time together that has a purpose to it. And so you can try to choose activities that meet both people's needs. So for example, going to a quiet coffee shop or like a bookstore can have a little bit of a lower energy, lower activity vibe, but is still active. And so it's like kind of meeting somewhere in the middle that can be a win-win for both the introvert and the extrovert. Another one that I know I mentioned earlier is you could go on a walk together. You could go on a walk with another couple. You could host a small group of people, but then make sure it has a time cap on it. That can really help for the introvert so they don't get overstimulated and expanded beyond what they can do. So if you have time limits, like you host an event for a certain amount of time, or you go to an event and you agree ahead of time that we're going to leave on purpose at a certain time, that can also help the introvert and the extrovert know how to both regulate their social energy. So if I know that I'm going to be there for 5 hours, the introvert can plan in small breaks to go outside or do something to help them feel okay if it's too much social activity. And if the extrovert is knowing like, okay, it's going to be 5 hours, or maybe it's only going to be 2 hours, they also know to like really soak up all of the social time during that time because it's agreed upon that we're going to leave at a certain time. So having boundaries like these time limits can help it make it feel safer, help us know that we're both going to get the connection that we're looking for, but also make it feel safer to both nervous systems and the different personality types. So here is an activity that you could do this week that goes along with this episode. Of course, you never have to, but you could plan one activity that is meeting both of your needs. And it doesn't need to be a perfect solution, and it's not a total overhaul of your relationship. It's just one intentional date night or social activity where you are saying both of us matter here. The way that we both approach the world and function in the world matters, and we're gonna find win-wins to meet both of our needs. And if you really want to make it fun, you are totally welcome to send me your funniest clash moment of being an introvert versus an extrovert couple. So maybe like a party that went too long and what happened with that, or like a last minute invitation kind of meltdown, or you were like closing down the bar and that did not work. If you have a funny story, feel free to tell us about it. My closing thought here for you is that different energy levels does not mean that you're incompatible. This is something that people often worry about, is like, does this make us incompatible? Are we just not a good fit to be together? That's not the case. What it does mean is that your relationship needs more intentional structure, and the structure is there to help make sure both of your needs get met. And so when both partners are feeling considered and that their needs are getting met, then the connection gets a lot easier. All right, until next time.